I don't need your help, Melanie. I'd rather lose everything than ask you for a single penny." Dad's voice was tired, but his jaw was still set in that stubborn line I'd known my entire life. He stood in the doorway of his cramped apartment, looking older than his 68 years, and I could see the foreclosure notice crumpled in his fist behind his back. I smiled, not cruel, just satisfied. "Finally," I said, adjusting my designer handbag strap, "something we can agree on." The color drained from his face, and for the first time in 32 years, my father had absolutely nothing to say. Before we embark on this incredible journey together, I have a small, heartfelt request. Please subscribe to my channel, give this video a like. It costs you nothing but means the world to me. And let me know in the comments which beautiful corner of the world you're watching from. Your support truly makes a difference. My name is Melanie Chen. I'm 32 years old, and that moment, watching my father realize that his favorite phrase had finally come back to bite him, was 27 years in the making. You see, I'd been hearing those words since I was 5 years old. "You're a disappointment, Melanie." Whether I brought home a B+ instead of an A, chose art class over advanced math, or dared to have an opinion different from his, the phrase became his signature, delivered with the same casual cruelty some parents used to say, "Good morning." But here's what dear old Dad never understood. Sometimes disappointments grow up to be the very thing you wish you'd treated better. Sometimes they become successful, sometimes they become powerful, and sometimes, just sometimes, they remember exactly how you made them feel. This story isn't about revenge, not really. It's about boundaries. It's about what happens when someone spends decades tearing you down, only to discover they needed you to lift them up. It's about the moment when "you're a disappointment" becomes "I need your help," and how the universe has a twisted sense of humor about these things. It started 3 months ago when my assistant handed me a certified letter during my lunch break. The return address made my stomach drop. Pinnacle Property Management, my father's apartment complex. Inside was a formal notice that Thomas Chen was 3 months behind on rent and facing eviction proceedings. The letter was addressed to me as his emergency contact, a detail I'd forgotten about from years ago when he'd listed me reluctantly, probably assuming he'd never actually need me. I stared at that letter for a full 10 minutes, sitting in my corner office overlooking downtown Seattle, watching the rain streak down the windows. My company, Chen Digital Solutions, had just signed a $2.3 million contract with Microsoft. My bank account had more zeros than my father had ever dreamed of. And yet, holding that piece of paper, I felt like I was 5 years old again, standing in our old kitchen while he explained why my finger painting wasn't good enough to go on the refrigerator. "Even your art is disappointing, Melanie." I'd saved that painting in my bedroom drawer for 15 years, like evidence of a crime I couldn't quite name. The thing about being called a disappointment your entire childhood is that you spend your adult life trying to prove otherwise, or you embrace it completely. I grew up believing I was broken. That was my father's greatest achievement as a parent. The evidence was everywhere. When I was 7, I painted him a Father's Day card with stick figures of our family. He glanced at it for exactly 3 seconds before saying, "Your proportions are all wrong, Melanie. And why is my head so big?" When I was 12, I made honor roll every semester for 2 years straight. His response? "Finally doing what you should have been doing all along. Too bad it took you this long." The worst part wasn't the criticism. It was the way he delivered it. Never angry, never shouting, just disappointed, like I was a broken appliance he'd been stuck with and couldn't return. My mother tried to buffer it. "He just wants you to be your best," she'd whisper when she found me crying in my room. But even she started flinching when he spoke to me, like she could feel the cuts too. The pattern became predictable. I'd achieve something, bring it home excited, and watch his face fall into that familiar expression of mild disgust. When I got into Stanford, he said, "Well, let's hope you don't waste this opportunity like you wasted high school." I stopped bringing things home after that. College was my escape. 4 years of professors who saw potential instead of problems, friends who laughed at my jokes instead of analyzing their flaws, and slowly, very slowly, learning that maybe I wasn't the disappointment after all. But the damage was done. Even as I built my company from nothing, even as the contracts got bigger and the office got fancier, I could hear his voice in my head during every presentation, every pitch meeting. "You're going to mess this up, Melanie. You always do." The irony is that his voice probably made me more successful. I worked twice as hard as everyone else because I was terrified of proving him right. I double-checked everything, prepared for every possible failure, built contingency plans for my contingency plans. Chen Digital Solutions became one of Seattle's fastest-growing tech consulting firms because I was running from the specter of his disappointment. We'd barely spoken in 5 years when that letter arrived, Christmas cards, awkward phone calls on my birthday where he'd ask about my little computer business with the same tone someone might use to ask about a lemonade stand. I'd stopped trying to impress him somewhere around my 28th birthday when I realized I was 33 years old and still seeking approval from a man who'd made it clear I'd never earn it. But that afternoon, holding that eviction notice, I felt something I hadn't expected: curiosity. After 27 years of being called a disappointment, what would he say when he needed something from me? How would he ask for help from the daughter he'd spent decades tearing down? Would he apologize? Would he acknowledge what he'd done? Would he finally say he was proud of me? I called my assistant. "Cancel my 3 o'clock. I need to make a house call." The drive to his apartment complex took 45 minutes through Seattle traffic. I'd never been there before. He'd moved after Mom died 3 years ago, downsizing from the house I grew up in to a 1-bedroom in Ballard. I'd offered to help with the move. He'd told me he had it handled and hired strangers instead. The building was tired, the kind of place where the elevator wheezed and the hallway carpet had stains that told stories. Apartment 3B. I stood outside his door for a full minute, listening to the sound of a daytime game show through the thin walls. When he answered the door, he looked smaller than I remembered. Grayer. His apartment smelled like instant coffee and loneliness. "Melanie?" He blinked, genuinely surprised. "What are you doing here?" I held up the letter. "You listed me as your emergency contact." His face went through several expressions: embarrassment, anger, resignation, before settling on that familiar defensive look I knew so well. "I don't need your help," he said, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. The thing about pride is that it expires when the electricity gets shut off. Dad stepped aside, letting me into his apartment, and I tried not to stare. The man who'd once lectured me about maintaining standards was living in a space barely larger than my office bathroom: mismatched furniture, a TV from the Clinton administration, and dishes stacked in a sink that had seen better decades. "Coffee?" he offered, the automatic politeness of a man who'd been raised in a different era. "Sure." I sat on his sagging couch, noticing the stack of bills on the coffee table. He wasn't hiding them anymore. They were just part of the landscape now. ComEd, final notice, Seattle City Light, service termination warning, a medical bill for $847 from something called Northwest Cardiology. He brought me a mug with a chip on the handle and sat across from me in a recliner that had definitely been purchased in the Reagan years. For the first time in my adult life, we sat in silence that wasn't filled with his commentary on my failures. "How much do you need?" I asked finally. His jaw tightened. "I told you, I don't need—" "Dad." I set down the coffee. "How much?" The number came out like a confession. $4,000 for the back rent, but I'm working on it." "Working on it how?" He gestured vaguely toward the corner where I noticed a pile of boxes. "Selling some things, downsizing further." I walked over to look. The boxes contained Mom's china, her jewelry, books from my childhood. The complete works of Shakespeare I'd struggled through in high school, annotated with my teenage observations, photo albums from when we were still pretending to be a happy family. "You're selling Mom's things?" "I don't have a choice, Melanie. The retirement fund didn't last as long as they projected. Social Security doesn't cover what it used to. Medical bills, He stopped himself. "It's temporary, just until I get back on my feet." I picked up the Shakespeare collection, remembering how he'd made me read Hamlet aloud to him when I was 16. Every stumbled word, every mispronounced name had earned a sigh or a correction. "You're still an amateur, Melanie," he'd said when I finished, "but I suppose that's better than nothing." "What's the medical bill for?" "Heart palpitations. Turned out to be nothing serious, just stress. But the tests," he shrugged. "American healthcare." I was quiet, processing. This man who'd spent my entire childhood pointing out my inadequacy was selling my mother's wedding china to avoid homelessness. The man who'd never missed an opportunity to remind me that I wasn't living up to my potential was about to lose the roof over his head. "I can write you a check," I said. "No." The word came fast and sharp. "I didn't ask you here for money." "You didn't ask me here at all. The property management company did." He flinched. "That was a mistake. I should have updated the paperwork years ago." "Should have? Could have." I sat back down. "But you didn't, and now here we are." He stared at his hands. "I won't take your money, Melanie." "Why not?" The question hung between us like a challenge. Finally he looked up, and for a moment I saw something raw in his eyes. "Because then you'd be right." "Right about what?" "That I'm the failure." His voice was barely above a whisper. "That I'm the disappointment." The silence that followed was deafening. 27 years of criticism, and he was worried about being the disappointment. The irony was so thick I could taste it. "Dad," I said carefully, "when did I ever call you a disappointment?" "You didn't have to say it. It's written all over your face every time you look at me. Successful daughter, failed father. I see it, Melanie. I've always seen it." I stared at him, this man who'd spent decades projecting his own insecurities onto a child, who'd somehow convinced himself that his daughter's success was an indictment of his own worth. And suddenly, sitting in his tiny apartment surrounded by the remnants of a life that had somehow gotten away from him, I understood something I'd never seen before. He wasn't cruel, he was terrified. The revelation should have changed everything, but it didn't. Understanding why someone spent your childhood dismantling your self-worth doesn't magically repair the damage. It just gives you context. And context, I was learning, is a cold comfort when you're 32 years old and still hearing your father's voice every time you doubt yourself. I left his apartment that day without writing the check, not out of cruelty, but because I needed to think. $4,000 was less than I spent on my car payment. I could have solved his problem with a signature. But something held me back. Maybe it was the way he'd said, "I won't take your money," with such finality, like he was drawing a line in sand he couldn't uncross. Maybe it was remembering how many times I'd offered to help him over the years, with the move, with Mom's medical bills, with basic maintenance around the house, only to be told he had it handled. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe I wanted him to ask. I went back to my office and tried to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting. Microsoft wanted to expand our contract. Amazon was courting us for a new project. My phone buzzed with notifications from business partners, employees, colleagues who respected my opinion and valued my input. The same brain my father had spent years calling inadequate was now worth millions to companies that understood its value. That evening, I called my therapist. Dr. Martinez had been helping me untangle the knots of my childhood for 3 years now, ever since I'd realized that success wasn't actually making me happy. "He's afraid of being the disappointment," I told her, pacing my apartment while the Seattle skyline glittered outside my windows. "After 32 years of making me feel like I wasn't enough, he's worried that I see him as not enough. How does that make you feel?" "Angry." The word came out harder than I'd expected. "I'm angry that it took him losing everything to develop empathy. I'm angry that he's still making this about his feelings instead of acknowledging what he did to mine. And I'm angry that part of me still wants to save him." "What would saving him look like?" I stopped pacing. Writing a check, fixing his problems, pretending the last 27 years didn't happen. And what would not saving him look like? The question hit different. I don't know. I've never tried not saving people before. Dr. Martinez was quiet for a moment. Melanie, what do you think your father learned from your success? That I'm not actually a disappointment? Did he tell you that? No. What did he tell you? I thought about our conversation in his apartment. That he's not taking my money because then I'd be right about him being a failure. So even now, even with you being objectively successful, he's still making your relationship about his inadequacy rather than your accomplishment. The truth of it hit like a punch to the sternum. He hasn't learned anything. What would learning look like? I knew the answer immediately. An apology, acknowledgement, some recognition that spending my entire childhood telling me I wasn't good enough might have been harmful. And if that doesn't come, then I guess I have a choice to make. 3 days later, my father called me. I was in a meeting with the Amazon team, but I saw his name on my phone and felt my pulse quicken. He'd never called me at work before. Never called me much at all, actually. I called him back during lunch, standing in the small garden behind our office building, where I sometimes went to think. Melanie. His voice was strained. I wanted to thank you. For what? For coming by, for caring enough to check on me. I waited for more. The acknowledgement, the apology, some recognition of the years of damage. Instead, he cleared his throat and said, I've decided to ask my brother for help. Uncle Mike. He's got some money saved up. Uncle Mike, who lived in Phoenix and sent Christmas cards, but otherwise maintained radio silence with our family. Uncle Mike, who was essentially a stranger, but somehow a more acceptable source of help than his own daughter. That's great, Dad, I said, and meant it. I'm glad you found a solution. I knew you'd understand. Family should help family, but there are appropriate channels. Mike and I, we understand each other. We're from the same generation. And there it was. Even in his moment of need, even after I'd driven across town to help him, he was still finding ways to diminish what I'd offered. My money wasn't appropriate. My help wasn't the right kind. I was still, somehow, not enough. I hope it works out, I said, and hung up. That night, I sat in my apartment with a glass of wine and finally admitted something I'd been avoiding. I didn't want to help him anymore. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor, and sometimes it has a sense of justice. 2 weeks after my father rejected my help in favor of Uncle Mike's appropriate assistance, my phone rang at 6:47 a.m. I was in my kitchen making coffee and reviewing presentations for the day when Dad's number lit up my screen. Melanie? His voice was different, smaller. I need to talk to you. What's wrong? Can you come over today? There's been a development. An hour later, I was back in his apartment, but this time he looked worse. His face was gray, and his hands shook slightly when he poured coffee. The bills on the coffee table had multiplied, and there was a new addition, a letter from Uncle Mike's attorney. He said yes initially, Dad began, not meeting my eyes. Mike agreed to help, but he wanted documentation, proof of the medical bills, copies of the lease, bank statements showing where the retirement money went. He said it was just good business. I waited. So I sent everything, and his lawyer called yesterday. Dad's voice got quieter. Apparently, Mike consulted with a financial advisor. They told him that helping me would set a precedent for other family members who might need assistance, that it wasn't sustainable long term. He changed his mind. He withdrew the offer, said he hopes I find another solution, and that he'll keep me in his prayers. Dad's laugh was bitter. Prayers don't pay rent. I picked up Uncle Mike's letter, skimming the legal language that essentially said, good luck, but no. It was polite, professional, and absolutely final. There's more, Dad continued. The property management company called. They're accelerating the eviction timeline. I have until Friday to come up with the full amount, or they're filing with the court on Monday. Friday, 4 days away. What about the things you were selling? Mom's china? Sold it all. Got $800. The antique dealer said the market for that stuff isn't what it used to be. He gestured to the empty corner where the boxes had been. Even pawned Mom's wedding ring. got $200 for it. The wedding ring. The one he'd slipped onto her finger 40 years ago, promising to love and cherish her. Now it was sitting in some pawn shop, reduced to its melt value. I called the church, he continued. They have an emergency assistance fund, but there's a waiting list. Could take weeks. Called the city social services office. Same story. Even applied for one of those payday loans, but my credit... He shrugged helplessly. I sat back, processing. So, Uncle Mike's appropriate help fell through. Melanie, please don't... Don't what? Point out that you could have avoided all of this 2 weeks ago? He was quiet. Did it occur to you, I continued, my voice carefully controlled, that maybe the reason I've been successful is because I'm actually competent? That maybe, just maybe, your daughter who built a multi-million-dollar company from nothing might be a reliable source of help? It's not about competence. Then what is it about? He struggled with the words. It's complicated, Melanie. Try me. I'm very good with complicated things. It's literally what I do for a living. You've always been angry with me. The statement hung in the air like smoke. Angry. Ever since you were little, nothing I did was good enough. Nothing I said was right. Hey, you looked at me like I was disappointing you. And then you grew up and became this incredible success, and it just proved what I always suspected. Which was? That I failed you. That you succeeded in spite of me, not because of me. And taking money from you would just be admitting that officially. I stared at him. This man who'd spent my entire childhood criticizing every grade, every choice, every breath I took, thought I was the one who'd been disappointed in him. The complete inversion of reality was so stunning, I almost laughed. Dad, I said slowly, do you remember what you said when I got into Stanford? He frowned. I was proud. You said you hoped I wouldn't waste the opportunity like I'd wasted high school. His face went blank. Do you remember what you said when I started my company? Silence. You asked if I was sure I wanted to risk everything on a computer hobby. Melanie, do you remember what you said last Christmas when I told you we'd landed the Microsoft contract? He opened his mouth, then closed it. You said, don't let success go to your head. You still have a lot to prove. I leaned forward. 32 years old, Dad. 32 years of trying to prove myself to someone who moved the goalposts every time I got close. The silence stretched between us, filled with decades of unspoken hurt. I never meant, he started. But you did mean it. Every criticism, every dismissal, every time you made me feel like I wasn't enough. You meant all of it. And now, when you need something from me, you want to rewrite history and pretend I was the one who was disappointed. His hands were shaking again. I'm sorry. 2 words. 32 years too late. But there they were. The apology should have felt like victory, but instead it felt like standing in the ruins of something that had been broken for so long I'd forgotten what it looked like whole. I'm sorry, he said again, his voice cracking. I never knew how to be a father. My own dad never told me I was good enough, and I guess I thought pushing you would make you stronger. It did make me stronger, I said, but not in the way you think. He looked up at me, hope flickering in his eyes. It made me stronger because I learned to validate myself, because I had to, because you never would. The hope died. Melanie, please. I know I can't undo the past, but you're asking for money. I'm asking for help, from my daughter, who I'm proud of, even if I never said it. I stood up, walked to his window, and looked out at the parking lot where my BMW sat next to rusted Hondas and pickup trucks with expired tags. A $40,000 car in a place where people counted quarters for laundry. Do you know what the worst part was? I asked, not turning around. It wasn't the criticism. Kids can survive criticism. It was the way you made me believe that love was something I had to earn, that your approval was always just one more achievement away. That's not what I meant to, but that's what you did. I turned back to him. And even now, even with your apology, you're still doing it. You're not asking me to help because you believe I'm capable. You're asking because you're desperate. He had no answer for that. If Uncle Mike had said yes, would you have called me today? The silence was answer enough. I pulled out my checkbook. His eyes widened, and I saw that familiar hope return. 27 years of conditioning, and he still thought money could fix what was broken between us. I'm going to write you a check, I said, clicking my pen. But not because you asked. I wrote carefully, my handwriting neat and deliberate. When I finished, I tore it out and held it up so he could see it. $4,000, made out to Thomas Chen. This isn't help, I said. This is a business transaction. Melanie, what do you mean? I mean this is the last money you'll ever get from me. The last time I'll rescue you from consequences you could have avoided. The last time I'll enable your pride at the expense of my dignity. He reached for the check, but I pulled it back. There are conditions. Anything. You're going to take this money and you're going to use it exactly as intended. Rent, caught up to current, no side expenses, no small emergencies that pop up. This solves your housing problem, period. He nodded eagerly. Second condition, you're never going to ask me for money again. Not for medical bills, not for car repairs, not for anything. This is it. Melanie, third condition, you're going to get financial counseling. Not advice from Uncle Mike or random strangers, professional help from someone who specializes in senior financial planning. I don't need fourth condition. You're going to stop telling people I'm difficult to work with. Stop explaining to relatives why we don't have a close relationship. Stop making me the villain in your story. He started to protest, but I continued. Final condition. If you break any of these conditions, I will never speak to you again. Not at holidays, not in emergencies, not at your funeral. You will become a stranger to me, and I will become a stranger to you. The apartment was so quiet, I could hear the upstairs neighbor's TV through the ceiling. Do you understand these terms? He stared at the check in my hand. $4,000. His salvation and his humiliation, wrapped in the same piece of paper. I understand. I handed him the check. He took it with trembling fingers, holding it like it might dissolve. Melanie, Don't thank me, I said, collecting my purse. This isn't a gift. This is a business transaction. You needed a service, I provided it for a fee. The fee was your promise to leave me alone. I was halfway to the door when he spoke again. What if I really need help someday? What if there's a real emergency? I turned back to him, this man who'd spent my childhood telling me I was disappointing, who'd rejected my help 2 weeks ago because it wasn't appropriate, who even now couldn't quite believe that his daughter might actually be competent. Then I guess you'll figure it out, I said. After all, you always told me I was resourceful. 6 months later, Dad kept his word. All of it. He deposited the check, caught up his rent, and enrolled in a financial planning course through the senior center. He never asked me for money again. He stopped making comments about our complicated relationship to relatives, and slowly, carefully, he began to change. Not completely, not dramatically, but enough. He started sending me brief, neutral text messages on holidays. Happy Thanksgiving, Melanie. Hope you're well. No guilt, no passive-aggressive comments about how lonely he was or how busy I must be. Just normal. When I got engaged to Daniel, the surgeon I'd met in my building, Dad's response was, "Congratulations, he's lucky to have you." Not, "I hope you know what you're doing," or "Don't let success go to your head." Just congratulations, and an acknowledgement that maybe, possibly, I was worth having. The changes were small, but they were real. He'd learned to ask for help appropriately, calling the senior center when his garbage disposal broke instead of suffering in silence until it became a crisis. He'd made friends in his financial planning class. He'd even started volunteering at the food bank, helping other seniors navigate assistance programs. We're not close. We probably never will be. 32 years of damage doesn't heal with one conversation and a check, but we're civil, respectful. And for the first time in my life, when I see his name on my phone, I don't feel that familiar punch of anxiety in my stomach. The real victory wasn't changing him. It was changing me, learning that I didn't need his approval to be valuable, that his limitations weren't a reflection of my worth, that I could help someone without enabling them, and I could love someone without accepting their dysfunction. My company just landed a contract with Google. Dad's response was a simple text, "Proud of you." 2 words. But this time, I believed them. Some disappointments, it turns out, are worth the wait. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment about the most valuable lesson a difficult relationship taught you. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding strength in the most unexpected places. Your support means everything to this storyteller. Melanie Chen.